Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Teboho Mutibinyane. I also represent a company called Wamsilt Education Consultants. We are in the business of student leadership, student development, student affairs. What I'm about to present to you student leaders is a concept called conflict management. It is important that from the outright, I front load you student leaders about the importance of why we felt the need to include conflict management in one of the arsenal of modules that we present to student leaders. Over the many years of working with student leaders across the country in a number of universities, we have come to appreciate that the existence of conflict is inevitable. Now, this conflict, by and large, will involve student leaders amongst themselves as a collective, as a structure. It also goes on to involve student leaders across the different political homes, and further goes on to include student leaders versus management of the institution. And so we've also seen the debilitating effects of these conflicts on the functioning of an institution. And that is why it is important, ladies and gentlemen, that there is an understanding of what this conflict is all about, how do we identify it, and most importantly, how do we resolve it, and how do we manage it so that we have better functioning campuses. In this conflict management, in this module that I'm about to present, the following are going to be very, very critical that we pay attention to, and these will, of course, form the framework of my presentation. It is important that, again, we recognize what conflicts are, but it would be remiss of us to also not mention that whereas we caution against conflicts on campuses, we also do realize that there are some benefits to conflicts, and we'll touch a little bit about the advantages and the disadvantages of conflicts. A number of writers and a number of thinkers have put their heads together to shed some light on what this conflict is really about. So what that means is that we will also look at a number of theories, as suggested by a number of thinkers, around what conflict is and what we believe it to be. We also want to look at the relationship between conflicts and society. Why is it that our societies are so laden with conflicts? Why do we feel the need to always resolve conflicts? And what are sort of mechanisms and instruments that we use to get there? But we maintain, in order for anybody to be able to manage a conflict, important is understanding the sources of a conflict. I think for me that is fundamental. Your ability to solve a conflict will require that you understand the source of a conflict. If you can pin down the sources of a conflict, the chances of resolving that conflict are even higher. But we also thought it is important that we categorize these conflicts. So there are those that happen at an interpersonal level, there are those that happen at an intrapersonal level, there are those that happen at an intergroup level. So again, student leaders are going to have to be able to determine at what level, at what category of conflict do they deal with on their daily operations in office. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to look at the communication strategies necessary to resolve those conflicts. We know that for a fact, as a matter of fact, is that conflicts are part of all human experiences, to the extent that even in a family, you will get conflicts. A facilitator and a mentor that I work with always makes mention of the fact that he has got a grandson that he adores to the moon and back. Even within that relationship between grandfather and grandson, you still do find conflict. One wants to watch a soccer match that is playing on a Saturday afternoon. The other wants to watch Nickelodeon, Nicktoons, if you like. Now, who gets to the remote control of the TV becomes the winner on that day. In itself, ladies and gentlemen, it is a conflict. But what that does is that it presents the opportunity for the older member of the family to then impart skills and knowledge to the younger ones about how to manage conflict. So a simple scenario such as watching TV or who has control over the remote can provide a perfect example for teaching people about conflicts. So we say this against the backdrop that it is part of all human experience and should be embraced as such. The problem then becomes when we think conflict, all that we think about are the negative things, and such as your broken relationships to conflicts. But we also do know that there could be some positives that could come out of conflicts. Let me make an example. So you've got two people who have been charged with organizing a student activity. There is a budget available for this student activity. The one member of the party has an idea of coming up with an activity that will include the gospel community, have like a prayer meeting for students, whereas another member of the party has ideas about organizing some sort of a bash or a party where students can have fun. On its own, can lead to a conflict, but when we make the point that it can be a positive conflict is when we then say to them that there is nothing wrong with either of those ideas. In fact, what you could do is complement one another, have a prayer meeting during the day, and then have a party or a bash in the evening. In that way, what you then have is a win-win situation for all parties, and of course that, I'm sure, will benefit students of that institution. But let's begin from the top. What is this conflict, right? What we do know is that, as I said, a number of thinkers have offered a number of definitions of what conflict is. But when all is being put together, there are a number of fundamentals that, for you to be able to define something as a conflict, they need to be existent, they need to be present. And those three things are, first, there needs to be emotions. There needs to be how you made me feel, as Maya Angelou put it eloquently, that people will forget what you said to them, but they will never forget how you made them feel. So issues of feelings are very important when you're trying to define conflicts. It is important, ladies and gentlemen, that within that same realm of defining conflicts, that you also understand the importance of thoughts, of perceptions, what people think. I always maintain people's perceptions are their realities. Unfortunately, those realities are based on falsehoods. We also do know that the number three thing that should be present for us to call it a conflict is actions, the behaviors. What did you do to another person? What was your reaction on the basis of your thoughts, on the basis of the feelings that you experienced? So three things are very important in your definition of a conflict. Must include feelings, must include thoughts, must include behaviors. We also do know that within that same space of trying to define conflict is that there are certain things that we are quick to call them conflicts, but in actual fact they are not conflicts, and they include such things as indecision. Indecision is I'm experiencing an internal turmoil and trying to make up my mind about what field of study to pursue at university. For that moment in time, I'm undecided, so I'm going through a little bit of indecision. That is not really a conflict in a true sense of the word. We also do know that in a very mature relationship, in a very mature society, disagreements are allowed and should be encouraged. But where you find a very immature organization, a very immature society, is where people are threatened by disagreements. Purely because I disagree with you, I'm then made to become a villain, and then we are made to become adversaries. But the reality is that we need to be disagreeing with one another. And the best way, in fact, to get to the best possible solution is for different people to bring different opinions and different viewpoints to a problem. Also, ladies and gentlemen, be careful not to call stress a conflict. By stress, we mean where people have to take decisions on the basis against the backdrop of very stressful situations. Rather allow time, and then only time will heal, and only time will lead to a better orientation. There are a number of orientations to conflict, and these conflict orientations, ladies and gentlemen, are based on our perceptions and on how we view the world. There's about three of them, and I will make mention of all three of them and explain them. The first one is called the lose-lose orientation. The second one is called the win-lose orientation. The third one and the last is called the win-win orientation. Now, with the lose-lose orientation, which is a very passive-aggressive sort of orientation, is that people compromise for the sake of peace. And I always make this point that the idea of just for the sake of peace can be a bit dangerous, because what it means is that you're compromising your beliefs, you're compromising the other person's beliefs purely just because we want to get along with it. Nobody wins in the end. A win-lose is also a bit aggressive, because you are suggesting then that somebody has to end up a winner, and when there is a winner, somebody has got to lose. Whereas, and I'll keep going back to a more mature society, a more mature organization. And let me interrupt myself while I'm there, ladies and gentlemen. That is, a more mature organization or a mature society requires mature individuals. Now, these individuals are individuals who are able to see the world with a win-win lens, meaning I win, you win. Earlier on, I made mention of an example of two members of a structure who are given a budget, and the task for them is to organize a student activity. The one has got an idea of going the spiritual route, the other one has got an idea of going the social route. Both of these can win to the point where we end up with an orientation that is characterized by a win-win for all parties. It's going to take a lot of maturity on the part of the individuals to get to that point. But our understanding of conflict must also be based on, as I said, a number of theories that have been suggested by a number of thinkers over the years. They have put forward what I have summed up into about four views, four theories of conflict. Now, it could very well be that as I go through these four views, these four theories, you are sitting there as a student leader and hold a particular view that is inclined to any one of those theories. That on its own is allowed, that is okay. What then needs to happen is that for an SRC structure, you operate as a collective. It is important that you identify what each one of you as individuals you hold dear to your heart. What do you believe to be the most relevant theory? And when you find out that you hold different opinions about the theory that should be applicable in your structure, then you begin to negotiate with one another about how you see the world until there's a convergence of ideas. Now, the theories, about four of them. The first one is called the functionalist view. The second one is called the humanist view. The third is called interactionist view, and the last is called a structuralist view. Now, let me explain that. The functionalist view are people who believe that all conflict is harmful and for that reason must be avoided, right? And these are the people who likely would fall on the trap, the lose-lose orientation that I spoke about earlier. So these are people who believe we should avoid conflicts at all costs. Then there's the humanist view. The people who hold a humanist view are people who believe that conflict is natural and conflict is inevitable with human beings. It is going to happen, we like it or we don't. Then there's an interactionist view. Interactionist view are people who believe that not only is conflict positive in a group, a positive force in a group. In fact, it should be encouraged. In the absence of conflict, they believe, in the absence of conflict, people do not move forward. Progress becomes slower. Then the last is the structuralist view. The structuralists are people who believe that in any society, there are those with more power than others. And they afford that power on the basis of their levels in society. What the structuralist view people believe in is that society is made up of different classes of people, and the ones at the top are always exploitative of the ones at the bottom. And yet the ones at the bottom are all the ones who are responsible for creating the economic wealth that is enjoyed by those at the top. Now, I'm making the point, the student leaders, that you go through these four theories on conflict. You've got to be able to determine which one are you as an individual inclined to believe in. When you have done that, you have to find out from your other colleagues, your team members, what they believe in. If you find that there's different ways of believing, you hold different opinions about the theory that should reign supreme in your structure, then you need to begin a process of negotiating with one another about the best way, the best theory that can characterize your term of office as the SRC. What that then suggests, ladies and gentlemen, is that by and large, none of these theories could be said to be bad. They only become bad if we fail to negotiate amongst ourselves how we are going to converge all our different opinions about the best theory for our structure. And again, I'll go back to what I said. The only way that you're going to be able to successfully negotiate that is if you display high levels of maturity. But we know that for millennia, human beings have survived purely on the basis of conflicts. We've gotten to where we are because there have been conflicts. We have managed these conflicts. We have overcome these conflicts. Well, why is it the case? It is because as human beings, we've got what we call instinctive behaviors. We have got what other people call primitive reactions to our world. We know that for us to survive, we have to overcome such things as hunger, as fear. And for us to be able to do that, you then find that the resources to fulfill those instincts are very, very finite, meaning we have to fight for survival. And what we've done over the years as human beings is that we've resorted to violence as a way to survive. And this is how our species as human beings is where it is today. To a very large extent, you could compare that with the animal kingdom, survival of the fittest. But I always make the point that, ladies and gentlemen, unlike animals, human beings are far more complex. Our brains are far more complex than that of an animal. What that means is that there's other ways of surviving rather than resorting to violence. And this is informed by how we then exercise our brains. And of course, our brains then lead us to exercising what we call a common mind. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that whereas we have survived over the many years as a result of violence, we cannot continue the same way purely because now we know better. We know that human beings are wired differently. We know that we've got brains that are far more complex than those of animals. We need to be able to begin to look at our attitudes and our behaviors, right? So earlier on in trying to explain what do we mean by conflicts, by defining conflicts, we spoke about the three factors that must be present. You remember them? They are feelings, their thoughts, and their actions. So it means the time with using the complex brains that we now have, we need to begin to look at our attitudes and our behavior patterns. How do we behave? And how are these patterns formed by the various societies that we live in? I think about the name of Eric Fromm suggests that there are certain factors in our nature that are fixed and they're not changing. They're not going to change anytime soon. For an example, the hunger. It's a physiological need. It's a physiologically conditioned drive that is not going to change anytime soon. So that instinct will persist for years to come. But yet another thinker, his name is Robert Gurr, he studied conditions that may lead to conflict situations. He said, why is it that we end up in these situations? One of them, ladies and gentlemen, is discontent. Discontent as a result of deprivation. And this can be a perception that is held by one part of society over the other, one individual over the other, but they perceive that they're experiencing a deprivation as a result of their discontentment. Now, deprivation is nothing but the discrepancy between your expectation and your capabilities. Gurr, the same Ted Gurr, goes on to identify a number of categories of values to us human beings. Number one is welfare. Number two is power, and the last is interpersonal relationships. Welfare is we need to feel like we survive. We need to feel like we survive. We need to feel like we have been taken care of. Our welfare has been taken care of. But we also do know that human beings, one of our greatest requirements to survive is power. And so the contest for power becomes another one of our issues. What we also do know about conflict, and this is from the studies conducted over the years, and this is from the work that we've done with a number of SRCs, is that conflict is an adaptive and a learned behavior, meaning we're not born to be conflictual. In actual fact, as we grow older, we learn conflict from those who socialize us. We also do know that conflict has got a life of its own in a relationship, and that it is that very conflict that will shape and change the complexion of the relationship post the conflict. So it is important how people get into these conflicts. It's important how people negotiate these conflicts. It is important how we resolve these conflicts, because all of those steps will determine the relationship post the conflict. Here is an important factor for me, at least. It is, we have found people in conflict situations over the number of times. And you ask the question, what led to this conflict? How did we get here? In more cases than few, very few people will explain to you how they got to that point. And so it makes the case for us, at least, that perhaps one of the most important things to do in the attempt to resolve your conflict is to understand the source of your conflict. Where does it stem from? If you can answer that question, you are halfway through solving the problem. I now need to introduce you to about at least 5 factors, 5 sources of conflict that at every altercation that you might find yourself in, be it in the home, in your relationship, within the structure of the SRC, within campus, with other political parties that are different from yours, ask yourself the number of questions. What was the need that was not satisfied? Therefore, so one source of conflict is needs. Number 2, perceptions. What is it that I perceived that could have been false that got me to a conflict situation? Perception is number 2. Number 3, power. Who has got more power over the other, and how is the exercise of that power? 4, values. How different are we in terms of our values? Our socialization, our upbringing, all of these inform the people that we become and the decisions that we take. And lastly is the issue around emotions. Whether we care to admit it or not, but there are always emotions in the way, and they tend to muddy the waters. So it is important that student leaders understand these 5 concepts to be needs, perceptions, power, values, and emotions. Now that we've understood a little bit about the sources of conflicts, it is perhaps now a good time to begin to analyze our conflicts. And as you would have guessed it, the most obvious starting point would be, what was the source of the conflict? Understanding that, then you begin to understand the types of conflicts, right? And I'll speak a little bit more about the types of conflict as we go on. Number 3, in analyzing your conflicts, ladies and gentlemen, begin to understand what are the causes of the conflict. What caused this conflict? Could there have been aggravators, matters that could have worsened the situation? Are there conflict mitigators that we could rely on in the process of trying to resolve these issues? And it's also important that in the process of analyzing our conflicts, ladies and gentlemen, we look at the dynamics of the relationship. To what extent do you value that relationship? Because I can tell you now that if there is a view that I do not value this relationship, then people are highly likely to not want to resolve that conflict because they do not care about the relationship. But in the event that this relationship was very valuable to you, individuals will go out of their way to resolve the conflict, because in resolving the conflict, you are saving the relationship that you believe to be important to you. We also do know that there are levels of conflicts, ladies and gentlemen. Conflicts can happen at a very interpersonal level. This is me and you, the individuals. It could be me and my partner, it could be me and my mentor, it could be me and my boss. But we know that it happens at an interpersonal level. But we also understand, we have seen it happen where there's role conflicts, particularly within the SRC setup, where one member of the SRC who holds a particular portfolio begins to encroach in other people's portfolios, as if feeling like the other members are not pulling their weight and only they can do the job. So we then end up with these role conflicts where one person wants to take over all of the work of the SRC, because they believe that in so doing they take over the glory and they appear as though they are better off as leaders in the eyes of the students. We know, ladies and gentlemen, we are very aware of intergroup conflicts. The world is today awash with intergroup conflicts. We spoke earlier about the geopolitical landscape of our world. Intergroup conflicts happen even across a number of political parties who see differently, but all, of course, aim to arrive at the same outcome, which is to serve students. Then, of course, there's the multi-party conflicts. That, as I say, once again, the geopolitical landscape of our world is awash with anecdotes of those multi-party conflicts. The warning signs of a conflict that is going to quickly get out of hand and spiral out of hand, that it is important that student leaders develop the maturity to identify and stem the tide very early on. We see it in a number of things. One of them is dysfunctional meetings. Is that here you have an SRC structure that is not able to hold a valid meeting and hold a valid meeting to its conclusion. Along the way, squabbles begin to take center stage. Personalities begin to take center stage. And in the end, we do not finish the meeting. And in so doing, no resolutions were taken. We also do know, ladies and gentlemen, that as one of the warning signs of a conflict that is spiraling out of hand is anger. Is where you have an organization, a structure of the SRC that is characterized by members who are constantly angry at one another, angry at the setup, angry at the institution, angry at management. So to the extent that they actually even use anger to drive their actions. We also are aware that the slowdown in productivity, the slowdown in the productivity of an SRC structure is another one of those warning signs that we warn about. And this you will see, usually an SRC structure will have its program of action for the year. No sooner do you realize that the year is about to come to an end, and yet the SRC has not achieved not even 50% of some of the activities in their POA. And that is a sign of slowing down of productivity, in itself a sign of a conflict that is spiraling out of hand. You're going to lose members, ladies and gentlemen, as a result of the conflicts. There will be members who will become disillusioned. And again, not only will you have dysfunctional meetings, but you will have members who do not attend your meetings because they feel the energy for attending meetings becomes reduced as a result of the number of conflicts besetting your organization. There's loss of trust. People don't trust one another. There's anxiety about the functioning of the SRC, about the SRC in itself. And this we have seen in a number of SRCs. It is the formation of cliques within the SRC, where people begin to huddle around one another, and then each one of these cliques has got a person who holds the fort, and they all see differently, and in the end they pull in different directions. And the disagreements are ongoing, they're never ending, they're repetitive. And of course, you will also realize the kind of language that is used in that organization. Very inappropriate communication, very inappropriate languaging that becomes the backbone of that structure. And these are some of the warning signs that we warn you as the SRC to be on the lookout for. Now, there is a thinker from Canadian, his name is Eric Bernet, who proposed an approach to resolving conflicts. To the extent that in the work that we've done with the SRCs over the number of years, we have found this model to win the day, purely because what Eric Bernet speaks about is that when all has been said and done, at the heart of conflicts is ego. Ego is at play. Now we need to understand ego to be something that all of us, human beings, we have. It's just that there will be people who will have ego problems. Now transactional analysis, as opposed by Eric Bernet in his approach, he says it is a communication-based theory that helps us better understand the transaction between two people. meaning the manner in which we communicate with each other, will tell you a lot about our relationship. But it will also tell you a lot about the different ego states that the individuals within that altercation, within that conflict, take up. Eric Bernet makes mention of 3 ego states that we always invariably take up, and we do that interchangeably. The first ego state he mentions is called the parent, which is the thought concept. The second one is the adult state, which is the thought concept. And the last one is the child state, which is a felt concept. Now, what that means is that at any point in time during the altercation, the individuals involved in the altercation take up any one of these 3 states. What we have seen over the years is that the likelihood of taking up the parent state or the child state are higher than taking up the adult state. We encourage student leaders to always strive to go to the adult or the thought concept. The reason why that is because it is only when we act like adults can the two of us find each other. For as long as in an altercation, one of us is acting like a child or the other is acting like a parent, it means we will never find each other. And if we never find each other, we are always going to talk past one another. And this is why the importance of communication and being very good at communication is important. What the adult state does is that it brings us all to a center where we can begin to speak like adults, where we are informed by policies of the institution, we are informed by the constitution of the SRC, to say, what does the constitution say? What does policy say? What does the Higher Education Act say? Rather than the child in me or the parent in me suggesting otherwise. So it is important, student leaders, that at all times strive to get to a point where you both act like adults. The levels of interventions, and I mean there's a number of interventions that you could always exhaust in the attempt to resolve your conflicts, right? One of them is called cooperative problem solving. Now, it is important that perhaps while we are at this point that we explain that the nature of our universities, or at least as prescribed by the Higher Education Act, proposes that the governance of an institution should be done in such a way that it is cooperative, right? I mean, cooperative means you've got council, you've got senate, you've got institutional forum, you've got the SRC. All of these organs come together to form a cooperative governance structure. What that means is that you are going to then require a cooperative problem-solving mechanism if you want to resolve issues of institutions. So you've got that as an option to exhaust in the process of resolving your conflicts. And of course, there's also issues of negotiations. But we hasten to add that negotiation also requires, just like communication, a level of skill. It means people must become au fait with how to communicate, how to negotiate, when to negotiate. There's also an option that you can always go to, which is mediation. Mediation is you've got an external party that can mediate between the issues, between the parties on the issues that they are faced with. There's also the issue around facilitation, which is, again, a third person can come in and mediate between and facilitate the interaction between the parties. In the end, ladies and gentlemen, you could also look at arbitration. Arbitration means you have this third party, and whatever they are ruling, it becomes binding on the parties. So it is important that student leaders, members of the SRCs, are aware of the levels of interventions which actually do exist in the universities, in all the universities of our country, and certainly within UNISA. We are also aware, student leaders, of the different styles of handling conflicts, based on people's personalities largely. A number of them have been suggested, and I'm going to go through them, and first I will list them. Number one is called a competing style of conflict handling. Number two is called collaborating. Number three is called compromising. Number four is called avoiding. And the last one is called accommodating. Now, what that means is that within the structure of the SRC, made up of the individuals that it is, you will find certain people who their primary immediate style of handling a conflict is to compete. For them, everything is about competing, that in the end somebody wins and another loses. You will find one or two people in your structure who are what we call collaborators, people who believe in the working together, people who believe in exchanging ideas and converging ideas. You will find one or two people, ladies and gentlemen, in your structure who we call compromisers, people who are willing to forego their initial demands for the greater good. These are people who see the bigger picture. Right? Sometimes let's look at what will serve the students rather than what will serve me, the individual. Then you'll probably find the one or two people in your structure who we call avoiders, people who at all costs would pretend as if a problem, a conflict does not exist, all in the hope that it will deal away all by itself. And then in the end, you've got people who we call accommodators, people who are like teddy bears, they want to accommodate everything. Again, you're more accommodating, you're more avoiding people tend to be your very, very passive people. Now, once again, the idea here is that identifying those individuals within your structure, you've got to be able to know how to handle and manage each one of them, but embrace the strengths in each one of you rather than exploiting each other's weaknesses. Human beings have got different responses to conflicts. One of which is what we call the fight response. The second is called the flight response. The last one is called the freeze response. What that suggests is that, and that has largely to do with how the brain functions. A part of the brain that is called the amygdala is responsible for these responses. Is that there will be instances where you are faced with a conflict where you just don't know what to do. And when you get to that point, you are experiencing a freeze moment, a freeze response. But there will be certain instances that are going to threaten you to the extent that the only thing that you can do is to flee, is to run away from the conflict, as literal as that. And that is the flight response that you're taking. But there will be instances where you feel the energy, the need to want to take on this fight and take it back to whoever is confronting you. And that is your fight response. Again, these responses are based on people's egos, they're based on people's maturity levels. So again, we go back to say, look at your levels of maturity and they will determine the kind of response that you give or elicit at all times. We also know that within relationships, there exists dynamics of power. And again, this is one of those issues that are very inevitable with relationships and with human beings. But it has then become an interest to try and study the laws of power in relationships. And in this case, the laws of power within an SRC structure. What we do know about power, ladies and gentlemen, is that power is extremely relative and power is very dynamic. What that means is that it shifts. It is ever changing. If you had it yesterday, be careful what you do with it, because when you lose power, that is exactly what they're going to do to you, those who assume power after you. So be careful, be very mature about your use of power. And perhaps it is a good time to also remind student leaders that being a student leader comes with a period of time, that there's going to come a time you're going to be out of power. Literally out of power, and as soon as you vacate that office, you are no longer a student leader, you are now a student just like all the others. Be careful what you do with your power when you have the power. Power is also a basic human need, really, meaning we need, all of us human beings, we need power in order to be able to successfully adapt to life. So it's not for certain people and not for others, it's literally for all of us. It is important that student leaders keep this in mind. Power can always be matched, and thus power can be countered. So somebody once made mention of, in very colloquial terms, says, for every dog there's a big dog, and for every big dog there's a bigger dog. Here is another interesting point about power, ladies and gentlemen. The use of one form of power for too long leads to the diminish of all sources of power. Now take the case in point of a number of presidents in the African continent who have been in power for over 30 years, to the extent that now, with the young people growing up, with the advent of social media, now people are beginning to want to demand to claim their power back. It happened with what is now called the Arab Spring in Tunisia, in Egypt, where people were beginning to believe that their presidents are holding on to power for too long, that it is now time for a change. Another interesting point about power is that any attempt to use power outside the range of power will tend to reduce that power. It is understanding that whereas you are an SRC member, your power could very well be limited to you being an SRC member. Anything outside, when you go to your residence, so you probably live in a residence of the university. When you go to your residence, there's a chairperson of the house committee that you must bow to. You must respect the power that they wield there. So it means be very clear about where your power ends as an SRC member. When you go to class, understand that the power dynamics are a little different. You are just a student, just like the other students in that classroom. And so you've got to be very, very, very mature about how you use your power. Here's another interesting point. Power of authority should be linked to responsibility, and it should be linked to accountability, meaning the positions that you today hold come with them, they require from you a level of responsibility, a level of accountability. We also do know that to expand power, it is better to share power, meaning multiply yourselves as student leaders, whether you do it by establishing a number of extra committees, SRC committees as we call them, but it is important that your power is shared and spread across your campuses and across the entire institution. And the only way for you to be able to do that is establish other students who can take up positions of leadership in the institution or in the campus. The deployment of power for the purpose of accumulating power for the sake of power has negative consequences. Now, to explain that, we are aware of leaders, let me not say students, we are aware of leaders who have been accused of buying votes. What that means is that they are using their power of money to buy power, to buy votes, meaning to accumulate more power just for the sake of staying in power. And that we are aware now, we know now, and we've got anecdotes to prove it, that has got lots of negative consequences. I always make this point, ladies and gentlemen, that only the strong can afford to be weak. As student leaders, there's a certain level of power that you wield that only you can afford to be weak on campuses and not your general student body. Appreciating that little fact will make you a little bit more mature with your power and how you use your power. And lastly, as I close, student leaders, an individual who does not deploy his or her power in group decision becomes a risk element to the group, meaning the more you hold on to power, without sharing the power, as we said, for you to be able to expand your power, you must be able to share your power, and soon you become a risk element to the organization, you become a risk element to the SRC, because it means all the power, all the information, everything that needs to be known about the SRC rests with you, that if you are not available, then the structure cannot function, and that in itself represents the risk element that we speak of. Now, in the end, student leaders, I think the point being made here is being aware of the existence of conflicts in structures and just developing the maturity to be able to resolve those conflicts. And you do it because you keep the greater good, the big picture in mind in everything that you do. That when all is been said and done is about doing the greatest good to the greatest number of students or to the greatest number of people in an institution. And for that, we thank you.